Right behind me is a single piece of signage that you can find at the airport in Grand Theft Auto 5. At first glance, it looks totally fine. But it's not. And it's just one of hundreds of overlooked details across 3 huge airports spanning all 3 mainline Grand Theft Auto games that we're going to be investigating today in order to determine if any of these iconic locations are even remotely realistic. We're not just talking about whether or not they look realistic either. We're talking about if they'd actually function as airports. And it turns out just because a game is newer doesn't mean everything about it is more realistic. We're starting all the way back in Grand Theft Auto 3, which was released in 2003, and its airport, which is called Francis International Airport, is the very first airport in the entire series. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what real-life airport it's based on because GTA 3 isn't as detailed as later games in the series, but there are good arguments for it being a mashup of 3 different real-life airports. Newark Airport in New Jersey because of its location, JFK Airport in New York City because of its layout, and Los Angeles International Airport because of its look. But really, it's probably not specifically based on anything in particular. We're going to divide our investigation here into 3 categories: runways, taxiways, and other. And for each category, the airport will get a grade followed by an overall grade for the airport as a whole. I'll explain each category as we get to it, but let's start with the most important part of any airport: the runways. Runways are the big long strips of asphalt and concrete on which the airports do their most important tasks: taking off and landing. And like everything at an airport, they're very highly regulated with strict rules about what should and should not be on them. One thing that should always be on a runway is a runway number, like this one. These numbers are really important because they tell pilots what direction the runway is pointed, like on a compass. All you have to do is take the runway number and add a 0. So for this one, it's labeled as runway 31, which means it's pointed towards a heading of 310 on a compass, which is roughly to the northwest. Pretty cool, right? There's some nuance here that we'll get into when we talk about GTA 4, but for now, this is going to be good enough. Let's see how GTA 3's runway numbers look. Oh, it doesn't have any. As far as the Federal Aviation Administration is concerned, not having runway numbers painted on your runway means that your runway isn't a runway. And if it's not a runway, you can't legally land on it unless you're having an emergency. So maybe every flight to Francis International Airport here just declares an emergency when they get close and then they nosedive for the asphalt, but most likely this is just a mistake. If these runways did have runway numbers on them, they'd probably be labeled runways 9 and 27 for the east-west runway there, and maybe something like runway 12 and 30 for the one that's angled slightly towards the northwest and southeast. Speaking of runway markings, these runways also have center line stripes going down the middle, which are there to help pilots stay centered on the runway. At first glance, they look pretty good, but on closer inspection, I actually realized a really weird mistake. These stripes change size from one end of the runway to the other, which is really odd. On the eastern edge of the runway, they're only about 55 feet long from point to point, and then towards the western edge, that distance nearly doubles. I measured this using the in-game Cessna 172 knockoff, which is a 27-foot-long airplane, so my measurements might be a little bit funky, but the underlying point still stands. My only guess is that they made this runway kind of like how you write on a birthday card, but then you run out of space, so you have to like start making all the letters really small as you get towards the edge. But I don't know why they wouldn't just like fix it. The only other thing to consider with the runways is the lighting. All runways need lights for when it's nighttime, because then people will be able to see. And funnily enough, GTA 3 accidentally maybe kinda nailed this. You see, runway centerline lights, the ones that run along the center, are supposed to be mostly white, but then they switch to red for the last 1,000 feet on either end of the runway to help pilots know when they're running out of road. In GTA 3, all of the runway lights are red, and at first glance, that would be incorrect. But if you measure the runway length by using that knockoff Cessna 172, the runway seems to be about 2,000 feet long. Technically, the entire length of the runway is within 1,000 feet of the end of the runway, in which case the lights are supposed to be red. So maybe this kind of works? I'm stretching the truth a little bit here because technically they're only supposed to be visible as red from one side, but still, it's a cool, funny little broken clock moment. So on the whole, the runways in GTA 3, unfortunately, the only grade we can realistically give them is an F. Next, let's take a look at the taxiways, and unfortunately, it doesn't get much better. In fact, it gets much worse because it's time for the sponsorship. I don't know why I said that, honestly. I like doing the sponsorship. Who is it? Me Undies, aka the greatest underpants on earth. Let me tell you a little something about how sponsorships on YouTube work. Hopefully they let me actually use this as a sponsorship. We'll see. So the way sponsorships work is they pay me money to tell you guys about a product, right? And they'll only keep paying me money to tell you about the product as long as you guys keep buying the product. And you guys will only keep buying the product if the product is actually good. Makes sense so far? Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but we've been doing MeUndies sponsorships for over a year, and there is no end in sight to this beautiful partnership, which means that for over a year, you guys have been buying MeUndies on my recommendation over and over again, and the only logical explanation for that is simple. The underpants truly are incredible, and I'm not a liar. And at this point, I've had my own MeUndies, which I'm wearing right now, for an entire year since we started, which means I can tell you with confidence they feel exactly as soft and, what's the word? You know how some underpants get like loose and weird? They don't do that. It's incredible. If you want to join the thousands of people who've bought and loved their MeUndies on my recommendation, go to MeUndies.com/AnyAustin and enter promo code AnyAustin to get up to 50% off. 50%, that's half. That's MeUndies.com/AnyAustin. Promo code AnyAustin for up to 50% off. MeUndies, comfort that's made for fall. I think this is going up on Halloween, so let's say comfort that's made for Halloween. Well, actually not, because you're not going to buy them until well, whatever. Anyway, next up, let's talk taxiways in Grand Theft Auto 3. Taxiways are basically the roads that airplanes use to get around the airport, and just like runways, there are lots of important lines and icons that are supposed to be painted on them. Unfortunately, GTA 3 has none of that, which makes this a fairly easy analysis. There are no centerline stripes, no signs indicating what taxiway you're on, and no signs warning you if you're about to enter an active runway, which is one of the most important signs. It's total chaos, and you can tell that it's a problem because when you watch the planes land here, they just taxi directly over the grass and into the ramp area without using the taxiways at all. Now, in terms of lighting, taxiways are supposed to have blue lights all around the edges, which these ones, of course, don't. But what they do have is red lighting down the center. Now, in a vacuum, this is better than nothing because at least now you know where the center line would be. But out of a vacuum, it's actually worse than nothing because the runway also has red lighting down the center, which means the taxiways now are almost indistinguishable from the runways at night, which means, you know, you're just asking for someone to have a Harrison Ford moment with that kind of runway design. There's a little aviation joke for you. Shout out Harrison Ford. So overall, this may not come as a shock, but the taxiways in Grand Theft Auto 3's airport get another F. Now, as far as everything else, you've got 2 air traffic control towers here at Francis International, one of which is in a good spot with good visibility across the whole airfield, and another of which is set back in such a way that I feel like it would be mostly useless. Remember, the point of the air traffic control towers is that the people in them can actually see all of the planes at the airport to make sure that they don't hit anything. So having a second tower just pushed all the way back in a corner, it's not really useful for any reason. I also don't know if any airports in real life actually have 2 towers. I can't think of one, except for that brief period in the early 2000s before Miami tore down their old one after they built their new one. But aside from that, you've also got the airplanes themselves, which are just kind of scattered all over the place, parked on these yellow parking spaces that I've never seen before. It feels more like an aircraft boneyard here, like where you put junk airplanes than a real airport, which makes for a really odd and unremarkable atmosphere, but not a very realistic portrayal of an international airport. In terms of miscellaneous things, I like this weirdly detailed bit of luggage on the ground next to the plane. GTA 3 in general feels really odd and empty, so to see something so detailed in such a random spot feels really neat. And I really like these signs telling you to have your passport ready and to prepare for a security screening as you walk into the airport from the ramp. I just think they're cool. There are a few airplane hangars here and other miscellaneous objects, but the one other big thing that stands out to me here is the terminal design. The terminal, if you're not familiar, that's just like the thing that you think of when you think of the airport, like the place that has the, what's that place called? Panda Express. So if you see a Panda Express, you're in a terminal. If we pretend we're a passenger getting off one of these planes, we would come down the jet bridge into this mini terminal and then go down some stairs, walk along the ground to this other unmarked building, then go through another tunnel to this big building, which is presumably the area with the Panda Express. But then you'd have to go through another tunnel to get to this central building, which kind of looks like a parking garage, before entering another tunnel to get to the main entrance building, which we assume houses security and baggage claim. Aside from being totally inefficient, the worst thing is that the air traffic control tower, both of them in fact, are directly connected to this terminal, which you wouldn't want to do for a whole host of reasons. So unsurprisingly, all of these extra details are also going to be given an F for realism. Almost a D, but it's an F, which means that overall the airport itself also gets an F. Now, that's not to say it's not an awesome airport. These grades have nothing to do with how good the game is or how cool the spaces are. This game came out in 2003, after all, and the level of detail that we saw in Grand Theft Auto games back then was much, much lower than it is today, for better or worse. GTA games didn't become the uber-detailed juggernauts that we know them as today until 2008 with the release of Grand Theft Auto 4. Funnily enough, the airport in GTA 4 is kind of the same airport as GTA 3. Both of the games are based off of New York City, and both airports are called Francis International Airport. But where GTA 3 was kind of a mishmash that kept the details loose, GTA 4 is a much more focused recreation of JFK International Airport in real-life New York City, both in terms of its geographic location on the east side of the map, but also for its physical details. The in-game terminal is based on the iconic TWA Flight Center, which serves as one of the real-life terminals at the airport. The runway layout is closer to JFK's runway layout with the 90-degree intersecting runways, and the air traffic control tower is ripped straight from the game of life with its iconic two-tiered half-shell design. I actually bought a miniature version of the JFK tower because I thought I was going to use it for the video, but once I finished the script I realized I wouldn't need it, but I just want to show it to you because I think it's neat. It's a little aircraft tower. Anyway, sorry, what am I doing? What are we talking about? The difference in detail between Grand Theft Auto 3 and Grand Theft Auto 4 is genuinely staggering, to the point that I feel like it represents a fundamental shift in what the point of Grand Theft Auto was going forward. There's a reason people joked about Rockstar delaying GTA 6 after my Powerlines video, because they're so notorious for their exactness that it seems like the type of thing they might actually do, and that philosophy really started here in GTA 4. Well, let's see if we can give them another reason to delay it. Looking at the runways, there are some obvious improvements right away. You can see way more markings on them in general. The centerline stripes are all the same length. There are runway threshold lines. You've got black tire marks from landing aircraft down the middle. There are these chevrons at the start of the runway, and best of all, runway numbers. Pretty much everything that should exist here exists. All of the elements of a runway are present. However, all of the elements of the runway are also wrong. Sorry. Except the centerline stripes, those are fine, but everything else is wrong. First of all, these markings running along both sides of the runway are what we call touchdown zone markers. Some people call them the piano keys because they look like piano keys a little bit. GTA 4 has a lot of these in place, but we're missing the most important marking of them all, the big fat 1,000-foot markers, which is a necessity on all runways. And then you've got the runway threshold markings, which is this big group of lines that indicate the start of the usable runway for landing, as well as the width of the runway you're landing on. These are also incorrect, but in a really funny way. You see, runways can have 5 different levels of stripes, as you can see on the chart behind me, courtesy of bold method, indicating widths as small as 60 feet, which is 4 stripes, or as large as 200 feet, which would be 16 stripes. The runways in GTA 4 have 14 stripes, and you can see on the chart that that is not an option. Funny little mistake. Moving on from the painted markings, the black tire marks down the middle of the runway are a great touch, but if you look closely, you'll see that something about them in the game is a little off. These black marks are skid marks that are left by the tires of landing airplanes. Over time, the runway gets more and more skid marks, and you end up with a collection of black marks in any place that planes regularly land. I'm sure this is obvious, but this means that most of the black marks will be gathered on either end of the runway where the planes touch down. In GTA 4, those black marks run all down the length of the runway, and they are the exact same thickness the entire way, which implies that airplanes are landing on this runway all along its entire length with equal frequency, which wouldn't be good. You don't want your plane landing halfway down the runway. You want it landing at the start of the runway, on account of then it has more runway to come to a stop and it doesn't go off the edge into the sea. And this is totally unrelated, but while doing the filming for this part of the video, I ended up getting this beautiful footage of Liberty City at night from above, and I just wanted you to see it. So now you're watching that for a second. We're just taking a break from airplanes. Anyway, back to airplanes. My favorite mistake here at Francis International Airport is the runway numbers. We talked about this earlier, but in real life, every runway has a number painted on it, and that number corresponds to the cardinal direction that that runway is facing. So take this runway from GTA 4, for example. The 1 here means that this runway should be pointed in the direction of 10 degrees on a compass, which is almost straight north. But it's a little more complicated than that, because runway numbers can also come paired with one of 3 letters, L, C, or R, which stand for left, center, and right. We use these in real life to distinguish between 2 runways that are pointed the same runway at the same airport. For example, runway 13 right and 13 left at JFK Airport in New York. They're both facing the exact same cardinal direction, 130 on the compass, so they have to get those letters to distinguish them. So in theory, this runway in GTA 4 is runway 1 right, meaning it should be facing almost straight north, and it should be the rightmost runway in a pair of runways. And as you might have guessed, it's neither of these things. It's pointed southeast, and it's not part of a pair, so that's totally wrong. But it's about to get so much worse. You see, you can land on runways going either direction, right? So if you have a runway 1, like we do here, you could also land on that runway going the other direction. But in that case, it would be called runway 19, because that would be 190 degrees, 180 degrees going the other way. It's just how circles work. If you didn't take geometry, I don't know what to tell you. But the number on the other end of this runway doesn't say 19. It says 2R. Which is not only wrong because this runway isn't pointed towards 20 degrees, it's also not a right runway, and in fact, if it was a right runway, there would be no way for the other side to also be a right runway, because if you flip 2 runways around, the right will become left and the left will become right. So what the hell happened here exactly? Well, if we look at the other runway, you'll see that it's labeled with 3 right on one side and 4 right on the other side, which of course is totally wrong as well. But that does mean that the runways are just labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, like just as though they were labeling for the number of runways that they had. I think this is hilarious and kind of charming, It's just 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, sure. One thing they did get right though, sort of, is the runway lights at night, because you'll see that they're white down the middle and red towards the end. This is in the ballpark. The red lights are supposed to be running along the center line instead of in the shape of arrows at the end, but it's still getting at least close to something sort of realistic. But aside from that, overall, the runways in GTA 4 are not great. They look nicer from a distance than GTA 3, but the details are still pretty rough. I'm gonna go ahead and give them a D. Getting away from the runways to look at the taxiways, there are some obvious improvements from GTA 3. The big addition here is that we do have a center line, which is super important. Unlike when you're driving a car, when you're taxiing a plane to the runway, you actually stay directly over the center line. And you do that because it guarantees that your wings won't hit anything on the other sides of the road, no matter how big your plane is. In terms of taxiway lights, there's one small section of the taxiway down here near the approach end of runway 4 right that has a set of blue lights around the edges, which, guess what, is exactly correct. All taxiways are supposed to have blue lights around the edges, so it's easy to differentiate them from runways when you're landing at night. So the real question is, why don't the rest of the taxiways have this? What employee at Rockstar knew to add blue lights to one small section of the taxiways, but not any of the rest? These are the questions that keep me up at night. The signage along the taxiways looks awesome from a distance. If you didn't know any better, you would think this is correct. But fortunately, you're with someone who does know better, so I can tell you that they are actually completely insane and wrong. We'll get into this more when we talk about GTA 5, but for now, let me just point out that these red numbers here are meant to tell us that we're about to enter an active runway area. So in theory, if you go past this sign, you'll be on a runway, which is not a place you want to be unless you're absolutely sure it's a place you want to be. As you can see, there's not actually a runway after this sign, or after this sign, or this one, or this one. They just kind of keep going all the way down. And in fact, the one place where there should be a sign like this, there isn't one. The black letter on this sign is potentially correct though. These signs are meant to tell you what taxiway you're on. So in this case, if you're seeing this sign, you are on taxiway A or Alpha. There's no real way for us to verify this, but it could definitely be plausible. So there are more details with the taxiways now than there were in GTA 3, but there's not actually any improvement in the overall accuracy. We're going to be giving the taxiways a D as well. As far as the rest of the airport design, I actually really like this place, even though it has a lot of issues. It feels way more alive than GTA 3's airport, even though nothing is really happening, but let me point out a few of my favorite things. Near the bottom of the air traffic control tower, you can see a bunch of controllers hanging out, presumably on break. There's even a little parking area for the controllers who are coming into work, complete with oil stains from all of their old leaky cars that they've been trying to keep running for too long. Just a little air traffic control humor for you. Shout out to all my air traffic controllers out there. Also, look at how nice the control tower looks. It is a great replica of JFK Tower. And if you bring a camera up to where the windows would be, you can see that you would have a great view of the entire airport from up here, so it's even functional. I also like all of the little bits of equipment out here near the runways. I'm not going to get into the details of why it's wrong because it is, but it is just nice to see them model some of these super niche things that you would only notice if you were a super nerd about airports. Nobody like that here though. And then you've got this big old radar dish spinning out here, which is the first airport we're looking at to have a spinning radar dish. It's not actually the first GTA game game to have a spinning radar dish, though. That honor goes to GTA Vice City, but we're going to wait to look at that airport until GTA 6 comes out so we can compare and contrast them. By far, the funniest and most unrealistic detail of this airport is something that actually took me a while to notice, but if you watch around here for long enough, you will realize that none of the planes ever take off or land. Seriously, look, if you've ever thought that you watched one of these planes land in GTA 4, you didn't. There's one that just flies by, and then the two on the ground that just do loops on the taxiway indefinitely, which gives the whole place more of a model airport vibe than a real airport vibe, and I think that's a huge plus. And also, every single plane here is a Boeing 747, which is wrong for a whole bunch of reasons. I'm going to give everything in the other category here a solid C. They've curated a great airport vibe, including lots of fun details. They've made a great air traffic control tower, built a beautiful terminal building, but again, the actual details totally unrealistic for the most part. So on the whole, in terms of actual realism, the airport in Grand Theft Auto 4 gets a D. It's still largely unrealistic when you get down to it, even though on paper they really went all out in terms of including a lot of recognizable details. Now, I know I said we were only going to look at mainline GTA games in this video, and that's still mostly true, but I have been playing through GTA Vice City recently and just unlocked the airport, so I figured I'd at least do a quick rundown of some of the cool stuff just as a fun bonus before we wrap up our whole video with GTA 5. Now, the biggest difference between this airport and the other ones we're going to be looking at today is that this airport actually allows you to go inside the terminal building, including through the metal detectors and all the way down the hallway to the start of the jet bridge. This is especially funny because in older GTA games, the way they spawned NPCs was just kind of non-discriminate, meaning they would just kind of spawn wherever. So you'll have all sorts of weird people wandering around here, and none of them have any luggage. On the whole, the airport is inspired by Miami International Airport, but funnily enough, the main terminal building is actually heavily influenced by the design of the TWA Flight Center, same as GTA 4, which means that both GTA 3 and GTA Vice City have airport terminals that were incorrect for their settings, but would later come back in another GTA game used more appropriately. There's a lot more signage here than in GTA 3, and it's actually slightly more accurate than GTA 4's in some ways, like how these runway numbers are correctly exactly 180 degrees apart, but they don't actually correspond to the real runways, and the runways themselves don't have any numbers on them. The control tower here isn't based off of any specific one that I could find, but it does have a little bit of similarity to Miami's old control tower, which was replaced in the early 2000s. Overall, it's a really cool airport, and I'm hoping that by the time GTA 6 comes out, we can do another airport video comparing how this version of Vice City's airport compares to what Rockstar can come up with 20 years later. Until then, though, let's return to the mainline games and finish up our investigation. 5 years after Grand Theft Auto 4 came out, we saw the release of Grand Theft Auto 5, and with it, the final airport on our list. The airport here is none other than the one everybody knows, Los Santos International Airport. Based heavily on Los Angeles International Airport in Los Angeles, California, LSX is both the largest airport in any GTA game and the only one where you can actually fly the jet planes that land here. In terms of aesthetics, they've nailed the look of LAX. The control tower is a spitting image. They've got the theme building right there at the entrance, and while it's not perfect, the general vibe of the terminal feels pretty close with its crossing walkways and maze of minor overpasses. Los Santos International has 3 runways, one north-south runway, and then 2 parallel east-west runways. There's a public terminal with 10 active gates for planes, not quite as many as the 161 that LAX has in real life, as well as facilities for private and general aviation traffic on either side of the airport. In some ways, this is the most fully featured airport in the entire series, but we are here to talk about the nitty-gritty details, so let's do that. Looking at the runways first, there are some great improvements here. You've got 8 runway threshold stripes, which is a sanctioned number, and it indicates that this runway is 100 feet wide. Now, in reality, if you actually measure the runway, you'll find that it's probably closer to 80, maybe 90 feet wide, but it's roughly correct. Further down the runway, you'll see that the aiming markers have been improved as well, with the inclusion of the big white 1,000-foot markers finally. Great job there. The actual distances between these markers is not correct, but if you want to hear more about how the scale of GTA runways is totally wrong, hit the subscribe button, and then the algorithm will most likely feed you my video on that subject within 24 hours. Yes, I have a video on the scale of GTA runways. Got over 1 million views. Now I know, excuse me, now I know what you're really wondering. How did they do with the runway numbers? Did they finally learn their lesson after 12 years since GTA 4? Well, the east side of the parallel runways here shows us at least one immediate improvement. These runways are labeled left and right, and they actually are left and right parallel runways. If we scoot over to the other side, the labeling is opposite, right and left, so the lettering is correct at least. But what about the numbering? Well, over here, we've got 1, 2 right and 1, 2 left, meaning that they should be pointed in the 1, 2, 0 direction on a compass, which is roughly to the southeast. If we line up the compass here and then draw a line along this runway, what we find is that this runway is, in fact, exactly lined up with a 1, 2, 0 heading on the compass. So they fixed it, or they almost did. Remember how we said that all runways can be approached from both directions and how each side is always going to be exactly 180 degrees from the other side? If this runway is pointed towards a heading of 1, 2, 0, that would mean the opposite side would have to be pointed towards a heading of 300, 300, which would mean we would call it runway 30. And as you saw, for some inexplicable reason, it's not labeled runway 30. It's labeled runway 33, which is weirdly close, but not close enough. It's funny how they sometimes get so close to realism, even to the point that it starts to show an underlying understanding of the real world logic, but then they just randomly fumble the ball and put something like this in. What's even more baffling is that the other runway is labeled with a 3 on one side and a 2, 1 on the other side, and it lines up exactly with 30 degrees and 210 degrees on the compass. So they literally got all of them right, except for runway 33. Aside from that, the runways are otherwise pretty solid. There are centerline stripes running down the middle, you've got tire marks spaced out towards either end rather than along the entire length. They even changed the color of the chevrons at the end of the runway to yellow, which is what they're supposed to be, as opposed to how they were white in GTA 4. There are some things to nitpick with the runway lighting, especially how it's this ugly yellow color instead of white, but overall it's honestly a big step up from 4. Again, the specific details here are wrong, but the basic elements are kind of almost in place. So we're going to give the runways here a solid C. Now the taxiways, let me just show you. One of the biggest upgrades is the addition of these hideous green bevels running along the outer perimeter, which are a real thing that airports have started putting in over the last 5 to 10 years to help pilots not accidentally go out of bounds. But LAX actually helped pioneer the practice long before that, which is why we see them in a game from 2013. Another new addition here are these markings on the ground. This set of lines is something called a runway hold position sign, and it indicates that if you cross over it, you're going to be entering an active runway. The big red numbers here are meant to tell pilots which runway they're about to enter. So in theory, this set of markings means that if you cross this line, you'll be entering runway 12 right, 12 left, and runway 3. Now you might be wondering, Austin, I didn't realize that there was a runway 3. And also, wouldn't there only be 2 numbers on this sign since each runway only has 2 numbers associated with it? And also, how can a runway be both 1, 2, and also, aren't those blue lights on the edge here? And also red numbers? You are correct about all of these things. This is an example of something that's neat to see, but the actual execution is totally incoherent. But unfortunately, this isn't the worst thing about this airport. Remember all the way back at the beginning of this video when I told you about this sign, which I said was the worst thing I'd ever seen in my entire life? Let's talk about this sign. So on this sign, we've got 3 sections. There's an A, there's a number 1, and there's a number 26 with an H after it. Let's take these one at a time. Firstly, the A. This is another one of those taxiway position signs, which means that if you can read it, that's the taxiway that you're on. In this case, we can see that we are on taxiway A. Now that's all well and good, except for the fact that if we drive all the way across the airport to a totally different area, it also says we're on taxiway A, which can't possibly be true. The second part of this sign is yellow with a black number 1 on it. Yellow signs with black lettering are directional signs, meaning that they tell you which way to go in order to find something. This is all real information you can use at a real airport, by the way. You could basically go fly a plane after this video. For example, this sign from the official FAA guidebook tells us that in order to find taxiway Alpha, we should go right. This one is telling us that in order to find runway 33, we should also go right. Letters are taxiways, numbers are runways. Got it? Okay, let's look at the sign from GTA 5 and see where it's telling us to go. It's telling us that in order to get to runway number 1, which doesn't exist, we need to go to nowhere. So this sign doesn't make any sense at all on 2 levels. And then my favorite part of this sign is the last bit. As we said before, a red background with white lettering is used to tell us that we're about to enter an active runway. So which runway are we about to enter if we go past this sign? That's right, runway 26H. which not only doesn't exist, but also can't exist because there's no such thing as an H runway. So just on this one sign, we've got 2 new named runways that don't exist, a missing arrow from a directional sign, and a totally new made-up letter for runways. But don't worry, we are not done. Take a look at this one that's 30 feet to the left on the exact same taxiway. This one says we are on taxiway Alpha still, and in the middle of it, it has a runway warning that we're about to enter runway 26. They took off the H for some reason. And then after that, we've got 2 directional signs, once again with no arrows, telling us how to get or how not to get to runway 1, which doesn't exist, and a brand new non-existent runway, runway 4. If you go even further down to the next taxiway, we've got another one. Still says we're on taxiway Alpha, but now it says we're about to enter runway 7 left. Another brand new made-up runway, even though this sign is leading right to the same runway as all the other ones. And then on the end, you've got a directional sign that has an arrow, but now they've taken away the thing that the arrow's pointing you how to go to. There are other examples of these crazy signs with more made-up runways and other baffling mistakes on them, so you can go spend an hour laughing at all of them now if you want to. But if you were ever curious what a real sign like this is supposed to look like, you can actually buy one for your house for a paltry $15,000 on eBay right now. And it came straight from JFK Airport, which is the one GTA 4 is based off of. If it wasn't for all these sets of signs, I might consider giving the taxiways a low C or a high D. But man, these signs are just so crazy that I can't in good conscience give the taxiways anything other than an F. Like most of these airports, the rest of Los Santos International is a mix of neat details and funny mistakes. I like that they have these big landing lights going out into the water. I like the rotating radar dish. I like the variety of planes available to fly and the fact that they have a whole hangar area dedicated to smaller general aviation planes like the ones I fly. That's a lot of fun. I like that they have an airport rescue and firefighting station. Can't imagine there's very many of those in video games. But the 2 strange things about the overall design here to me are that 1, while it looks great, the air traffic control tower is weirdly far back from the runways. You know, the goal of a tower is that it's high enough that you can see all the planes, right? Like we talked about. But from up here, whole sections of the airport are totally blocked from view. That's not unheard of at airports, but it's definitely not common and definitely not the case at any major airport that I know of. And then 2, it just feels kind of dead out here. Despite the density of planes being higher and the overall level of fidelity going up, I find that Los Santos International actually feels less interesting and alive than Francis International from GTA 4. Maybe that's because it's just so much bigger and more open, or maybe it's because they literally have a plane graveyard on one side of the field. But regardless, it just feels a little odd to me. I'm not that big a fan. So for the rest of the details, I mean, again, they're all cool. They all look good on their own, but they're not super realistic. So I kind of think I have to give them a D, maybe a low C. I'm going to go with D, which means that overall, despite the improvements to the runways, the airport in GTA 5 also gets a D, same as GTA 4. So we've got an F, a D, and another D, which means that as cool as GTA 3's airport is, in terms of realism, it's kind of a tie between GTA 4 and GTA 5. In order to break that tie, let's look at one more aspect of these airports and see which one does it better, the passenger pickup area. Technically, this isn't part of the airport in terms of official regulated areas, but it's a big part of what people like you and I interact with anytime we travel. And both GTA 4 and GTA 5 have great contenders here. GTA 4's passenger pickup area combines arrivals and departures into one location, and depending on the weather and time of day, it'll have NPCs waiting around for rides outside the terminal. You've got some of the airlines labeled and a few information kiosks and things, but beyond that, it's relatively bare bones. There's a train station across the street and a parking lot, which is a nice touch, and I like that they included a toll station for entering and exiting. But for as cool as this area is in GTA 4, GTA 5 steps it up to a whole other level. First of all, the arrivals and departures here in GTA 5 are separated onto 2 separate levels, just like at a real airport. The NPCs have actual pieces of baggage, and their body language is so much more realistic, looking at phones, talking to one another, watching over their bags. There are also more realistic props like baggage carts and transit kiosks, and even though you can't go inside, you can see inside the terminal just a little bit, which is always fun. And really the only unrealistic I could find here is that both levels of the airport, arrivals and departures, had people waiting to be picked up, which of course wouldn't happen at a real airport. But it's a pretty minor detail, and overall the level of fidelity here is really fun. So GTA 5 is the clear clear winner in this category, which means that, even though it's close, overall the edge goes to Grand Theft Auto 5. Congratulations to the newest game in the series for also being the most realistic. Who would have thought? The big question now is whether or not GTA 6 is going to have an airport that can get higher than a D. The only thing we know for sure is that it's going to continue the series' obsession with passenger-carrying 747s, which don't really exist anymore. And also, there's no 747s with passengers that actually fly to Miami International. So that's one thing GTA 6 got wrong already. Oh well. I'm Minnie Austin. Thanks for watching.
Everybody likes me, everybody likes me, everybody likes me.